Good morning, Morai Rabotai. We're continuing on Masechet Avodah Zarah on Daf Yud Zayin, Amud Aleph, on top of the Amud. Today's Amud is being learned. Zechut Yusha ben Diana, Yael bat Rivka, Menashe ben Asi. This Amud is also being learned. The Zechut Refuah Shelema of Yaakov Meir ben Nahid. And today's Amud is being learned as well. Le'aliyat Neshama of Sipora bat Yitzchak. We are on top of the Amud discussing the story of Rabbi Eliezer ben Chorkenus, Rabbi Eliezer Agadol, the Rebbe of Rabbi Akiva, who was nitpas leminut. We mentioned two different understandings based on Meromeh Sadeh, and also the conventional understanding of the Rishonim. He was either suspected to believe Christian beliefs in a Roman government who was a pagan government, and they would kill the Notzrim, the Christians, when it was spreading, or that he was actually taken leminut, to be forced to let go of Judaism and go to the minut, and otherwise they would kill him. And he had to say what he had to say. There was a double-edged wording. On one hand, the Dayan, the Hegmon, the judge, thought that he's agreeing with him, and he never really said that. But he was sad that he was taken in this type of situation. And Rabbi Akiva told him, maybe one time you benefited from from minut, and therefore it got stuck to you. This is why you were brought to this type of situation. And he said, yes, correct. The story of this fellow in the upper shuk of Sipori, who actually told him a beautiful drasha, a cute drasha about Etnan Zonah. The pasuk that talks about Etnan Zonah, that the Gemara darshened, and now the Gemara is going to go back to it, which the pasuk says, towards the end of the pasuk, in the first parak of Micha, pasuk Zayin, it says, Ki me'etnan zonah kibatza, ve'ad etnan zonah yashuvu. So this fellow darshened, he said, Ki me'etnan zonah kibatza. It comes from etnan zonah, it goes to etnan zonah. Therefore, since it comes from makom tinofet, from a dirty place, it could be used, the money of it, for a dirty place. So even though that the Torah says, Etnan zonah, lo tavi etnan zonah umchikele bet Hashem Elokecha, you cannot bring etnan zonah and use it in Bet HaMikdash, you could use it, the money, you could use to build a Bet HaKiseh, a bathroom for Kohen Gadol in Har HaBayit. That's the drasha, and Rabbi Eliezer said, I had a geschmack from this drasha that this min said. So that's the story that the Gemara said. Now the Gemara is going to say, well, this was the min that said this. But what did the Chachamim say on this pasuk? Itake is a interesting pasuk. What does it mean? Ki etnan zonah is a payment of a zonah, of a harlot. So you say, etnan zonah kubatza or etnan zonah shuvu. What does it mean exactly? Says the Gemara. So Chachamim, my darshibe. So what is this exactly? This pshat that etnan zonah that the Micha says, Rabbanan, hay me etnan zonah my darshibe. Says the Gemara, keder Rav Chisda. They darshin like Rav Chisda. The Amar, the line starts with the Amar Rav Chisda, kol zonah sheniskeret lebasof hisocheret. Any person that gives in to the ta'ava of zenut. So even if they are a person that they are hired for zenut themselves, like etnan zonah, they end up at the end having to pay for it to have it. So anyone that accepted etnan zonah ends up having to pay etnan zonah in order to have their ta'ava, their physical needs met. This is something actually very much reminiscent of the Gemara in Masechet Baba Metzia. The Gemara there has a whole story of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's grandson, the son of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. The Gemara said he was a very handsome man, and he went off the path. And he was actually hired by zonot. It says, Kol zonah, any zonah that would charge 2 coins would pay him 8. And the Gemara says, somebody said, well, it's possible the grandson of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the son of Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon together authored Zohar HaKadosh. It could be that their son is like this, and he accepted upon himself to go bring him back. And it's a fantastic story how this person made a travel back to becoming a Talmid Chacham, which has very much to do with the upcoming Gemara. The Gemara is going to discuss what happens with a person that's going to do tshuva when they are deep into averot, in minut, in zenut. Do they live afterwards? Do they die afterwards? It's going to be the upcoming Gemara. But nevertheless, says the Gemara, if you are addicted to something, you're going to end up losing everything for it. Even if you started getting paid for it, Zenut is that type of a nature that you end up ruining your life completely, and Besof, at the end, you end up giving the Etnan Zonah to others. So how do you read the pasuk? The read of the pasuk would be Ki etnan zona kubatza. A person that was gathering etnan zona, he was paid for zenut. Ve'ad etnan zona yashuvu, is going to come back to a situation that he would have to give etnan zona for meeting his needs. So says the Gemara, Shenemar ubetitcha etnan. This is a beferusha pasuk in Yechezkel Perek Tetzayin that is talking actually about the Jews, how low they had stooped, that instead of them being paid to do averot, they were doing the averot paying for them. So the example that the pasuk in Yechezkel gives is that you are giving etnan, ubetitech etnan, you're paying to do averot. Ve'etnan lo nitan. It's not that people are paying you, but the Gemara darshins it. It says vatehi lehefech, right? You'll be upside down. It's backwards. And the Gemara is darshaning. It says it's backwards because every avera, the nature of avera is like this. First, it seems that it's paying you. It's a beautiful Ramban. The Ramban speaks about a chazal that says, Ever katan yesh l'adam. There's a small limb in the person's body. Must be or ra'ev mar'ivo savea. That if you satiate it, it becomes more hungry. If you starve it, it becomes more satisfied. So of course, chazal meant to speak about this area of promiscuity, but Ramban writes it's not so. It says it's about every ta'ava in the world. Every ta'ava in the world is in a nature that you think you're going to satiate it by feeding it, but the more you feed it, the bigger of a monster it becomes. Chazal explained the concept of dopamine and addiction in their own word, a simplified way. And the Gra brings this from the Midrash in Igeret HaGra. He says, Olam hazeh is like a thirsty person that is drinking salt water. It seems to him that every gulp that he takes is going to be satiating him. But what happens is he becomes more and more thirsty. Every drop of salt water that he drinks, it becomes worse and worse. So that becomes the nature of this chazal, which you see it in one way in this Gemara, but really is mentioned dozens of times across the writings of chazal. Ubetitech etnan ve'etnan lo nitan lach. You will end up having to pay everything you have for that addiction, for that hana'ah that you want. Ve'etnan lo nitan lach. So says the Gemara, Upliga de rapedat, damar rapedat lo asnat Torah ela kereva shel gilui arayot. Now, the Gemara said that the drasha that we had, that Rabbi Eliezer ben Churkanus brought, was that you can't be el petach betalo tikrav, don't get close to the petach of zonah which means stay away 4 amot even from the house of Zinut. We mentioned that the Shulchan Aruch in Yoredah actually says this, that you have to distance yourself 4 amot. You're passing by a place that is a place for these types of things. You don't pass by it. You go 4 amot away, you veer off the path, not even to get close to it. So it says the Gemara, that drasha of darshaning the pasuk in Mishlei, Opetach betalo tikrav, meaning Zinut, is pligat Rab Pedat. That is in contrast with Rab Pedat. The Tosafot say, not that Rab Pedat doesn't agree with that. Rab Pedat also agrees with that. That actually answers why the Shulchan Aruch passes it's not as a machloket. But says the Tosafot, Chachamim darshened it from the pasuk in Mishlei. Rab Pedat understood that pasuk differently, but he also agrees, like the Gemara has it in Shabbat, Kuf Yud Aleph, the Gemara says, a Zav and Zava cannot be eating together because of Kereva Arayot. You can't get close to scenario of Arayot. Everyone agrees with that. You have to distance yourself a few steps from any closeness to Arayot. But whether or not you darshan it from this pasuk in Mishlei, that's the machloket, not the halacha. The halacha is agreed upon, says the Tosafot, by everyone. But let's see what Rab Pedat would do that. Says the Gemara, Upeligat Rab Pedat. The Amar Rab Pedat said, Lo asra Torah ela kerva shel gilui arayot bilvad. So the drasha of the pasuk does not prohibit anything but kerva shel arayot. If you are doing a closeness to erva that is leading to gilui arayot, that is what's asur. For instance, it's actually a machloket Maran, Shulchan Aruch, and the Shach in the Chod Nida in Tzman Kuf Tzadihei, I think it's in Sif Chaf, if I remember correctly. There, Maran understands the Shita of Rambam. It's talking about a person getting the pulse of his wife that's Nida. His wife, but she's Nida. Nida is one of the 15 Arayot that's there. You can't touch. It's Gilui Erva. So Maran understands the Shita of Rambam to say that that's Asur, and not only is Asur, it's Yareg Val Yavor. You can't do it, even if it's going to cost your life. The Shach disagrees with him. He says, well, that's not what the Rambam means. Rambam says if it's derech chiba of arayot and getting close to actual act of arayot, that's when it's asur from the Torah, and it's yarek val yavor. But getting a pulse is not necessarily considered yarek val yavor, says the Shach. He understands the Ramban differently than the Rambam, of course, and so on. So that becomes a source of machloket. Of course, the Sfaradim are more hooked on the psakim of Maran, and it creates actually a scenario of tremendous chumrah for the Sfaradim who follow the shita of the understanding of Maran in the Rambam and the psak of Maran. So says the Gemara, Rab Pedat says only if it's kereva la'arayot, 4 amot to the house of Zola. That's not what the drasha means. But it's rather any closeness to the actual act of Gilui Erva. So says the Gemara, Ula ki hava ati meberav. When Ula would come from Bet Midrash, he would come finally home. They would come, once in 3 years, once in 4 years, sometimes after 12 years. But whenever he would come from his Bet Midrash, he would kiss his sisters. Menashek lehu le'achate abe yedaihu. He would kiss his sisters abe yedaihu, underhands, or some say abe yedaihu is very different than a yedaihu. It's not underhand, but rather they had long sleeves. He would kiss the clothing underhand, right? So says the Gemara, and there are those who say ve'amrila abe chadaihu, under chest. It says the Gemara, wait a second, that doesn't make sense, because Ula himself says such conduct will be asur. What did Ula say? The Amar Ula kereva be'alma asur mishum lech lech amrinan nezira schor schor lekarma lo tikrav. Ula says, any kereva be'alma, any closeness to an erva, and your sister is an erva. Your sister is an erva that en libo shel adam nokfo. You don't have yetzer hara for a sister, but it's considered erva. It's one of 15 arayot. So says the Gemara, even that type of an erva, that en libo shel adam nokfo, that the person is not at all, doesn't have any feelings of negativity, still would be considered something negative. Why? Because Lech lech amrina nezira sechor sechor lekarma lo tikrav. It's a concept by Nazir. Nazir is a person that made a neder, Nazir lahazir lashem, that he's not going to drink wine. Now, what happens to grape juice? Also asur. How about grape seeds? Also asur, right? Mizak bar charsanim. Grape seed oil, sorry. How about passing through a vineyard? Can you go through a vineyard? I mean, why not? Sure, right? But says the Gemara, there is this shita, and himself, Ula himself, paskin like this, says, you know what we tell the Nazir? We tell him, schor sechor lekarma lo tikrav. He can't even go around, schor schor. Don't pass through a vineyard. Go around it. Lekarma lo tikrav. Don't even get close to kerem. Mislad Yesharim actually has a fantastic piece when he talks about perishut, when he talks about nikiyut. He references this in several places, that you have one time that Chumash tells you a klal, and he expects you to apply it to everywhere in your life. Says the Mislad Yesharim, Hashem tells you what he expects by a Nazir. Nazir made a sur on himself on wine, and now he has to abstain from not just wine, but the grapes and the grape seeds. And even to kerem, we tell him, don't go through a kerem, go around. Make sure to make fences for yourself. So says Ula, if there is one area that you need to make fences, is this area of Gilui Erva. So therefore, any kereva be'alma, even a regular closeness to an erva, would be asur mishum lech lech amrina nezira schor schor lekarma lo tikrav. Says the Gemara. So the Gemara doesn't answer, how did Ula do this? Gemara just says, upeliga dideh adideh. He himself, what he did, contradicts what he held halachically. So what does that leave us with? Is that a stira? Because he, of course, would not do something that he holds as asur. So how come he was doing this? Now, this Gemara, in Masachet Ktuvot, this Gemara is brought in Ritva at the end of Kiddushin. It's brought in several places, both in Chazal and in the Rishonim. But the Gemara that's most known is the Gemara in Masachet Ktuvot, Daf Yud Zayin. The Gemara there on page 17 says, Rav Acha, on in a wedding, would put the kala on his shoulder and would dance with the kala. Now, Arvadia says, for instance, there's a Hasidic minhag, at the end of a wedding, a Hasidic wedding, there is called a mitzvah tanz. That means a rikud shel mitzvah, right? The way it works is, it's pretty actually interesting. What they do is, it's an old standing minhag, that they have a massive gartel. It's like 250 feet long, and the kala holds it standing there. She's not dancing. She holds one end of it, and the whole thing is on the floor. And the other end of it, the Rebbe holds of the Chassidut. For instance, if you have the Ger Rebbe, and he dances, holding this, and she's just tens of feet away. But the entire place is watching it. Like you could have 5,000 people watching this, right? Haravadia is very against it. He actually writes, says, "Enze mitzvah rikut shel mitzvah." He says, "This is not a rikut shel mitzvah. This is rikut shel avera." So he calls. He says, "Rikut shel avera." Of course, that would be very offensive to the people who have had this minhag, and the Rebbe is the Rebbe. But nevertheless, there are reasons why they do it, and so on. It's explained. But Not to imagine if somebody would pick up the kala and put it on her shoulders and dance, right? Yeah. So the Gemara says they asked Rab Acha, I said, wait a second, can we do this too? And says Rab Acha, it says, idami lechu kekeshura, if it's to you like a piece of log, a wood, yes. That means Rab Acha says, I'm different than a regular human being. And if a person is like that, yes. If you're not, then you're playing with fire. You may end up in a very, very warm place, right? So that's the Gemara. So it says the Ritba. Many of these, the halachot of this area, depends on a person himself and what they are. A person has to know themselves very well, and this is something that comes actually in many areas of the halachot in Even Ha'ezer. For instance, you have in Sman Chafalef Chavbet, you have the halachot of Kereva La'arayot, you have halachot of Yichud, and there are many scenarios that halachically speaking it would be mutar for Yichud, it's not considered seclusion with an erva, but it's not the right scenario to put yourself in an office that even though that you have right halachic parameters to save yourself from yichud, but it's not always going to be the proper setting for a ben Torah to be in. And a person should know themselves on the top of that as well. A person that they're very close to this area in their mind and their makeup, they should distance themselves far more than other people. And that's the yesod that the Ritba says at the end of Kiddushin. The Gemara seems to say it in Ktuvot Daf Yud Zayin, and that's what the Mefarashim explained by Ula over here as well. Ula said, regularly speaking, a person should stay far away from this. But nevertheless, Ula felt himself he had no problem, and therefore you had this maaseh of Ula. So that's to just answer a basic, obvious question in the Gemara. The Gemara kind of like leaves this hanging and goes to the next concept. So next concept is talking about, once we spoke about minut and we spoke about zenut and the government, right? We said don't get close to minut and don't get close to the government because they always ask for themselves, and once they draw you, it's very difficult to get out of it. So Gemara is going to give another drasha about minut and the government. La'aluka shte banot. So regularly we understand aluka means the Gehinam. Why is aluka the Gehinam? A reference to Gehinam. The Ben Ish Chaim Ben Yoyada writes because aluka would be a reference regularly to a leech, which people would use to as a cure. They would put it on their body to suck the bad blood, and this way their body would be cured from the negative blood that was inside. That's how they used it as a healing thing. Still, some places in the world they do that for leech therapy. Yes, that sounds good, leech therapy, right? But the time of Chazal was certainly very, very prevalent. And says the Ben Yoyada, that's what the Gehinam does. The Gehinam sucks the averot out of a person, is a process of purification. So that's what it's called aluka. So says the Gemara, there are two things in Gehinam that the Gemara calls them in. The Gehinam calls them in. La aluka shte banot, yes, two daughters, have, that they always say give. One of them is minut, my have. What is have? Amar mor ukva, shte banot shesoakot mi Gehinam. There are two of them that call out from Gehinam, ve'omrot be'olam hazeh, have. They say bring, because minut, it would be people who were really attached to Avodah Zarah, and constantly they would demand korbanot to the Avodah Zarah. And the government of a yesteryear, when there were kings and there was monarchs and so on, whoever was attached to them had to bring them gifts and taxes all the time, and that will be they would be accountable for it. Ba'olam haba, basically, ve'omrot ba'olam hazeh have, umaninhu minut va'reshut, is the monarch kings and also minut, that mindset would be the two. Ika de amri, that those who say, Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Mor Ukva, Kol Geinam Soeket. Is the Geinam calling out these two people, these two entities? Ve'omeret, Haviu li shte barot. Bring me the two entities, Shesoakot ve'omrot, that they will call out and ask people, demand people. In Olam Hazeh, Haveh, Haveh. Be'ezrat Hashem, we'll continue this in the days to come.